They're coming to get you, Barbara.
What do people call you, Pete?
Mr. Joshua.
What's your name?
Schreck.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
Look, there comes one of them now.
Today we'll be discussing Indiana Jones. It's come on, it's an iconic series. Everybody, I mean, if you don't know, it's like Star Wars. If you don't know it, you should be ashamed of yourself. I mean, where have you been living? Or do you? I mean, it's the best. We're going to spend the next while talking about going into how awesome this series is, how much we love it, the things, even though there are some things we don't like, we'll get into those too. How much we love Indiana Jones as a franchise, as individual movies, as a whole. Like, it does so many wonderful things, and I can't. You're gonna be singing the praises of it. I can't imagine too much negativity coming.
Well, there might be a little bit of negativity, but we both love the series. That's why we chose this one as our first episode. So, we're just going to go into the beginnings of Indiana Jones, go through each one of the 4 movies. And yes, as much as you'd like to forget the last movie, there are 4 movies. And we will be going into all of those and everything like that. And just kind of talk about it like we're sitting around drinking a couple of brews. So let's talk about the planning a little bit.
I mean, the origin and start of it, as Spielberg and Lucas were both big fans of serial films where you would have to come back each week to the theater to watch a new story where crazy adventures would happen and there'd be a new story adding to it and then another crazy adventure and then new story until you saw the resolution of the plot. Also, they're big fans of James Bond, big fans of Tintin. I mean, you see a lot of Tintin references in it. You see how much they loved these things, and they wanted to create something that they felt was as good or even better, as timeless as some of these things where the serial films were from the 40s, the 30s. The Tintin had been around for a long time, and Bond obviously had been switched up characters, even though this was the late 70s, they were forming their ideas, it had really been around and shown that it had legs, and they wanted to create a franchise like that.
And arguably, Indiana Jones did that. They created something just as timeless, just as memorable, an icon of a character that all of those serials that they grew up loving, as Tintin, they did a really good job of creating this wonderful the wonderful world of Indiana Jones. I think they did a really good job, and we're gonna start.
Before we go into it, you made a good point. We talked about Bond, and you made a comment to me the other day about how you feel Indiana Jones, I don't want to go into it too much because that's not what we're here to discuss, about how Indiana Jones is a potential character that could be a Bond character, that could be changed up. And in fact, think on that while we discuss these films and what we like about them, and we'll finish it at the end and see if you think that's something that's feasible for the series, as it's been a topic for us as discussion, a topic of discussion for us as lately. So we're going to start with the first film. Let's go ahead and start with Raiders. I mean, I think if you've seen an Indiana Jones films, I would hope that you've seen this. This is the one. If you've only seen one, it's the original. It's the first one. It's not even called Indiana Jones. It's literally just called Raiders of the Lost Ark. It started it all. It was nominated for some awards, I think.
It had 9 Academy Award nominations, released in 1981. Obviously, the way the format usually works, and it did through all the movies, is Lucas writes the story, Spielberg does the directing, and like I said, nominated for 9 Academy Awards.
Wasn't it Best Picture, one of them?
I'm not sure.
I think it was. I can't remember what it lost. I remember I've had this discussion with some people before and how upset we are that it lost like On Golden Pond or something like that.
But
horrible.
It's honestly considered by most fans, not by us, I don't think.
I would agree.
To be the best of the movies. Sort of like Star Wars isn't really, but that's
a different discussion.
Yeah, But Raiders is usually considered the number one movie in the series.
I mean, I understand why. There's so many great things. You have Karen Allen as what's her Marion Ravenwood, I believe is her
I
name.
think that's it.
And Sala, John Rhys Davies as Sala.
Gimli fame.
Gimli, I can't help but love Gimli. I was a Sliders fan as well. That's where I originally fell in love with him. And I can't remember who played Marcus Brody.
Denholm Elliott.
Denholm, yeah. I think
I loved him as a sidekick. I thought he did a great job.
I mean, I think we should have. I wish we would have seen him in other stuff. He was really good in that.
Yeah, I love Karen Allen. I love John Rhys Davies. Marcus Brody, Denholm Elliott was really, really good as well. The cast was, and of course you've got Harrison Ford. Now, originally Tom Selleck was the choice that they wanted.
Would he have had the stash? I mean, imagine Indiana Jones with the stash. That changes the whole dynamic.
Harrison had the stubble.
The stubble, the shadow.
Yeah. But Tom Selleck had the mustache. I wonder how that would have turned out. I don't think it would have been as iconic, to tell you the truth.
I don't. I agree. I think Harrison Ford really has a certain charisma. I could discuss a lot of Harrison Ford movies that I think he carries based on him as an actor alone. And I think that's part of what it is. That swagger he had in that first movie just made him so definitive, that character. Obviously, that's why, as I mentioned, the name of the film didn't have Indiana Jones. There's a reason that name carried on through the rest of the films, because he lived that character, he breathed that character. It came out as, there's so many iconic scenes. The sword, bringing a gun, a sword to a gunfight, is one of the most classic scenes in film. I mean, I'm sure it's on AFI's list of something somewhere. It's so amazing, that scene. I've seen it 50 times. I laugh every time. It makes me smile.
And, the opening scene is one of the most famous, where he goes into the temple down in South America.
Oh, and he's wearing the
medal,
bag.
and he's making sure the bag weighs, and getting chased by the ball and everything. Lots of iconic scenes in the whole movie. What was your favorite one?
If I had to pick my favorite, it's with the snakes. No. Yeah, with the snakes. I'll go with the snakes. There is a lot of great ones. The fight with the when the planes run in. But the snakes, because it's great to see him afraid. It's great to see him like something frightened. I mean, even though you can see the glass separating him from the snake in the one scene, bad special effects. Now I'm sure they've digitally, taken it out.
Digitally removed it. Of
Yeah,
course, Lucas going back.
ruining the original vision of the film. We can reference the South Park episode. But I think that's for me. What about you?
Well, I'd probably have to say the most memorable scene of the movie. I think personally is the most memorable scene is actually the ending. I didn't really care too much for the ending, with the arc being open and everything like that. Yeah, all the face melting. I mean,
close your eyes.
Even being a horror movie fan like I am.
That is rather surprising. I think that was a good solid ending. It really, because you were wondering what was going to happen, and it finally delivered what could they deliver, and that was something I thought that really added a nice touch. And it's hard to sell. You've built it up the entire film. What's inside when you open it? What's going to happen? And when you open it, you have to give something to us. You have to deliver. And I thought they did. I mean, it's hard to give it everything, but it wasn't the most amazing. But it was definitely satisfactory, at the very least satisfactory.
Yeah. You start out with the submarine, and that was kind of boring, the whole arc thing. I didn't really enjoy that too much. But the most memorable scene, I think, from the movie is the warehouse scene, where the ark just gets stuffed in a box in a warehouse.
That scene is amazing.
Yeah.
It stands out in your memory. When I was a kid, it's what stood out. From the only thing I really remembered from the first film. But I would like to. Were Nazis ever really a villain before this? How often did you see them as a villain after the war?
You saw them quite a bit.
You did see them quite a bit. Was it? I always felt it was kind of touchy, being hitting on the subjects, and you could finally just. At this point, maybe it had already been established, but you could really just sell them as wholly evil.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you really don't have to, when you're using the Nazis, you really don't have to try too hard to make everybody know that they're bad guys.
How evil. You don't really have to sell the villain
Yeah.
too much, because you know they're the Nazis. You know the things they did and how horrible they were.
So they didn't have to waste time on that. They could just work on showing us the quest for the Ark.
And I think coming to the end here on our thoughts on the first movie.
Well, just real quick, I want to mention also the score.
Oh, the score.
The score is, hugely
John
popular.
Williams. John Williams.
Every score that he does.
He's a legend.
You name a movie that has a memorable score, and 9 times out of 10 it's going to be John Williams. And obviously in Indiana Jones he delivered.
10 will be Danny Elfman.
Yeah, you'll have that one Danny Elfman. All the rest will be John Williams. But then we move on to the next movie, which is actually a prequel.
Yeah, Temple. I remember playing. My earliest memory actually before the movie itself is playing the video game, the old arcade Temple of Doom, where I remember wishing I had a quarter so I could play and watching him run out on the bridge. And it's such a part of my childhood, Temple of Doom, the second film. While as an adult I may view it a little differently, I still think I view it better than most fans of the series do. I think it has a lot of redeeming qualities. A lot of fans think it's kind of bad. But I think it's got a lot of great things about it. We're going to discuss here in a second.
Well, it was when I was a kid. It was my favorite Indiana Jones movie. It's the first one, obviously the sequel with Indiana Jones, which actually, like I said, is a prequel. It takes place in 1934, I believe, 1936, and the first one takes place in 1939 or 1936.
That sounds about right.
But it's actually a prequel to that. It was my favorite one as a kid. I loved the railroad chase and everything like that. But it is quite a departure from the first movie, where you had it was definitely a darker theme.
Much darker.
The story, not only the story, but the cinematography as well was a lot darker. Kate Capshaw, she gets a lot of hate. Now,
Willie Scott. I mean, even the name of the character is horrible.
And I know you said earlier, like, a lot of fans don't look good on it. I think in the years since it's come out, fans have warmed up to it. But the Kate Capshaw thing is, everybody really hates her character and her portrayal of the character and everything like that in the movie.
I think I've even read a quote from Spielberg where he said something along the lines of, the only thing he can say great about Temple of Doom is that he met his future wife out of it. And I mean, that's...
Yeah, she is the wife of Spielberg.
Yeah, I think that's kind of funny. That makes me wonder why she's even in the movie in the first place. There's so many actresses who could have done a better job. I don't hate her. A lot of people do give her flack. I don't hate her. She does not ruin the film for me. But I definitely think somebody else could have played her better.
Yeah, well, but on the upside, we get Short Round, who's played by Jonathan Ke Quan.
Yeah, that sounds right.
He's actually, well, this is probably his most famous film, but he was actually in
Goonies. He was so well received. He as Data in Goonies, which, if you grew up were born in the 80s, you probably saw Goonies, I would assume. And he was, as well as Indiana Jones. And he really, a lot of people give him flack too, and I disagree.
I thought he was great in the movie.
I think he's funny. He's a good. He bounces off his rapport with Harrison Ford is great. They seem to have a fun time with each other, enjoy each other's company. The lines, the banter is great. Him with the bricks on his shoes when he's in the getaway car in the opening scene. I mean, Dr. Jones,
as good as Marcus Brody was in the first one, I thought Short Round was this good in the second one.
Yeah, I actually would probably say I liked him a little bit more, honestly, in compared to the first film. I love Marcus and I love Saleh even too in the first film, but I think Short Round is just so great.
Yeah, he's definitely a standout thing from that movie. It was a lot different movie. There has been a lot of criticism and stuff like that from a lot of the fans and a lot of people. I mean, based on the movie.
We can start with the horrible portrayal of Hinduism and India as a whole country. I mean, I don't believe that was intentional, but it seems to be pretty blatant disregard for their culture. And I mean, every culture has its faults, but this one seems to ignore and just fill in a lot of gaps and give a negative, could easily create somebody who's impressionable and doesn't know anything about their culture and an automatic negative impression. And I understand why there would be that reaction. I think if you watch it as an adult, or at least are informed of it, you can understand it's not really meant to be that way. It's meant to be about a small group. It's not meant to be the entire culture. And I think it's bad that people give it that rap.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, I had no notion of that. I didn't notice, how bad this portrayal was. I just thought it was another Indiana Jones story. It never really dawned on me that this is what Hinduism is like. I didn't see a problem.
Do you
with
see
that.
it now when you watch the film?
A little bit.
I mean, with the eating the brain, the monkey brains, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know a lot about different religions and stuff like that. And yes, it's a bad portrayal of Hinduism, but it's a movie, it's a story, it's kind of like a cultish group of people. I never thought of it as encompassing the whole of the religion.
You know, and as we talk about these dark scenes, I think we have to point out the fact of how important the film was as a film, because it changed the rating in the industry of PG. It was only PG and R at this point, and people felt that this film was obviously more than just a kids' film. It had violence. It had some graphic things in it that weren't really appropriate for young children. And along with other films like Gremlins, they decided to develop the PG-13 rating, which now is, it's a big deal now, because if you're 12, 13, if you're under 17, those are the movies you can get into are PG-13. That's why the PG-13 horror genre does so good. And this movie really kind of shaped what it meant, like how different it was, the changing times, how dark you could make a film, and how it could really not be be a family film and be not a family film at the same time.
Yeah, and that's obviously why they developed the PG-13 rating. But unless we have anything more, we'll move on to.
I do have one last thing. There's some really ridiculous scenes in this film that I really love. That I think people, I don't know if they hate them, they love them. The scene with the mine carts when they're racing each other and he slides in the waters. I mean, the scene's so amazing. It's a lot of matte shots. The bridge scene where he's cutting the rope, as I mentioned about on the video game I saw him, where the guys are coming at him and the alligators are down there waiting. It reminds me of something I saw earlier where something fell into alligators and exploded. It's these amazing shots, long shots. The bug scene where they're in the room filled with the bugs and in the secret passageway, and the only scene in the middle the scene that kind of makes it stop dragging in the middle a little bit, which is my only complaint.
Yeah, it definitely goes to a little bit more of the absurd.
Yes.
When you get into that movie, and they really continue that throughout the series, but it starts in.
It starts in this one, and that's definitely more extreme. I would say it's a little more extreme than it would be in the sequel, second film and third film in the timeline. I don't know how we want to discuss The Last Crusade.
Well, The Last Crusade came out about 5 years after Temple of Doom. I think it was released in 1989, and they kind of went for a back to the first film kind of thing. They noticed there was a lot of hate and vitriol with the Temple of Doom, so they brought it kind of back to a very religious theme, like
more centered on what we would understand in the West. Definitely.
Yeah, brought it to the brought in the Holy Grail instead of the Ark this time. The Nazis were once again the bad guys,
which was a great choice. I think you didn't have to worry about portraying something. We already knew these people were evil. We don't need to be lied to.
To me, it's my personal favorite.
Yeah, I don't know if I can agree. I think it's definitely the funnest film to watch. I shift a lot. I often have to end on Raiders or Temple for personal reasons, either for filmmaking reasons for Raiders or personal reasons for Temple on the timeline. But obviously the funnest, hands down, the most watchable of the films, easiest ride is definitely The Last Crusade. I mean, with Sean Connery as Dr. Jones Sr.,
Henry
Jones, which we would be.
Henry Jones Jr. was named after the dog Indiana.
Yeah, we would realize that later. He makes this film the buddy companionship they had with each other, and bringing back Marcus, bringing back Salah, really made the film feel like a return to the franchise that people had hoped for in the second film. I think, even though I think it was a smart choice going for something different in the second film. I think this is the sequel that people really wanted to the first film.
Yeah, and a lot of people look at 1 and 3 are the good ones, 2 and 4 are the bad ones. It's kind of like the reverse Star Trek curse, so the even-numbered movies are good. It's like the odd-numbered movies are good in this one. They also brought in some really good new characters. Elsa was really good.
Elsa, I did like Elsa. I had to look up her name because I was curious, because I found her kind of attractive and I wanted to know. I haven't never seen anything else she was in. Her name was Allison Doody, I think.
Allison Doody.
Doody.
Okay, we're not going to do a Doody joke.
I'm going to skip that. It might be. I might have misspelled that. I'm not sure. And then, of course, Julian Glover as Donovan. We got to love Julian Glover. He's so charismatic and just evil in that film. He makes it. You love him as a villain. He's definitely my favorite villain in the franchise. I mean, Molaran from who we forgot to mention, actually, who's a great villain.
He was really good.
In Temple of Doom. Had one of the scary scenes with how could we skip the heart scene, That scene was so traumatic to me as a child.
I loved it as a kid.
I feel horrible actually skipping that scene. I have to mention that if you haven't seen Temple Doom, or if you
Let's go back to 1936. Mention that scene.
Yeah,
and then we can move forward.
Yeah, because that scene was so great, where he rips out, it was ripping out the heart, and they're putting it, about to drop it into the lava, and Dr. Jones is all possessed, and Short Round has to, it's amazing. I can't believe we skipped that. We can go back now. But Julian Glover as Donovan was such a great villain. I think he's my favorite villain in all of the franchise, and he conveys that sense of really refined and like honed in hate. Like he has these goals for himself that he intends to lead him to this plan. Obviously, I don't want to say too much in case you actually haven't seen the film.
If you're listening to us, you obviously
I would hope
should
I've seen
know,
the film.
Yeah.
So
about these films.
to get the cop, he has all these things.
Spoiler alert for every episode, just in the future.
That does right. Well, technically, I ruined it by saying it was the villain forever ago.
Yeah.
I suppose.
But as much as I was blah about the ending of of Raiders of the Lost Ark, I actually really liked the ending here with the knight from the Crusades and everything like that. I thought the ending was really well, and them just kind of riding off. Was it horses or camels?
I think they're camels.
Yeah.
I think it is a great ending, and a lot of people feel it should have been the ending. We'll go into that later. I don't have a problem with it later. It's great. That film ends it. It ends itself in its own way. It doesn't have to end the franchise. It ends the film beautifully.
Yeah. And one thing we forgot to mention about new characters is we got River Phoenix in this one.
Oh yeah, but
right in the beginning scene.
Right in the beginning scene, I mean, did we skip Hitler as a character? I mean, he was a great character.
That was a great scene. That was one of them cheesy scenes.
One of them cheesy scenes we brought in the X marks the spot.
X marks the spot. You got the meeting with Hitler and the signing of his
and
dad's
the
book.
action sequence in the motorcycles is so amazing, like so over the top. In the Zeppelin scene, there's so many like ridiculous scenes in that film. I love it.
Yeah,
it's
that's where
fun.
we picked up on the ridiculousness of Temple
the
of
boat
Doom.
where they're in the boats and the one sucking it up, and this opens the chest and he's like, I'm work for these. It's a great film. I think that we can't ignore the facts of how well it was received and how well most people think it should have ended the franchise. River Phoenix was great. A lot of people had.
Well, it obviously didn't end the franchise. The whole River Phoenix thing.
River Phoenix, as you were saying,
when he was a kid,
we saw the young Indiana Jones, and then after the movie, a lot of people wanted more movies, but we didn't get it. We got the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which I thought was a great idea, even though it didn't necessarily pan out. Harrison Ford even had an appearance in one of the episodes to solidify that it was meant to be a continuation of the Indiana Jones story. I personally haven't watched it too much.
I've only caught like an episode or two.
I've watched
it's hard to find.
It is hard to find. You can buy it. I have not because I don't know the quality of it.
Yeah.
And I wish I had, but it wasn't. A lot of people thought when that ended that would be the end, and for years
it only lasted for like a season or so.
Yeah, I think only like one season. For years we would go by and have nothing, and maybe a lot of people think it sort of stayed ended there with the three films.
But then 2008 came along, and that's like 20 years after Last Crusade came out.
Just about.
And we get Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the most universally panned and hated of the franchise by the fans. And I don't think it deserves it.
I don't either. I personally don't think. I mean, while I would say it's my least favorite in the franchise, I think that it is if you watch it by itself, it is an Indiana Jones film. It feels like an Indiana Jones film. The fun spirit of all the other films is there. It does have a little bit more problems than the other films. A couple of scenes and characters that I don't like. I mean, we can go on forever about how much we hate Mutt Williams.
Oh, Shia LaBeouf's just terrible. It's one of them. Steven
Why?
Spielberg has his little fan guys that he loves to cast, and he was just in love with Shia LaBeouf, and he threw him in there. I don't think he's ever been in a Spielberg movie, but he was just in love with Shia LaBeouf and threw him in there.
Yeah, and I think that's a big problem with the film. I mean, he doesn't ruin it, again, and we like the film. He doesn't ruin it, but he definitely drags it down a little bit, and it's unfortunate because that character, I don't necessarily say it's wholly his fault. The character itself has its issues, but they could have cast somebody a little more better. But you did have some good new additions to the cast. like Kate Blanchett as your villain.
Well, they decided this time to go with the Soviets as the bad guys instead of Nazis.
Yeah, you had to do something different. The characters of age, so the story has to obviously take place.
The Germans weren't important anymore.
The story is going to have to take place in a different era.
Interesting fact, actually, the original idea for the story was to have ex-Nazis actually hunting after him and everything like that.
I must say I'm very satisfied they did not go with that route. I did know there was some complaints by the Russians. They're like, this movie takes place the same year we launched Sputnik. How can you say, show us in this horrible light? I don't know if I can really argue that we're not going to get into political debates about what's right or wrong. I thought they were fine as villains.
Yes, they were good as villains.
And I thought Kate Blanchett was great. The reason we brought it in is Kate Blanchett is great as your villain. And then you had some good extra characters. Ray Winstone as Mac. An actor you're a large fan of, I know. I'll let you even mention him as Ox, your boy.
Yeah, he's a great actor. He did a good job in
John Hurt.
John Hurt. Oh yes.
Sorry, way to go.
Yeah, I totally missed what you said there, but John Hurt, I think he's awesome. He did a great job in that movie. Just stands out. I love that they brought Karen Allen back from the first movie.
Karen Allen, Marion, you can't help. Everyone loved her so much in Raiders. She was such a well fleshed out character that you felt Indiana Jones, it was his equal. She wasn't just some girl that was along for the ride, kind of how you felt about Kate Capshaw as Willie in Temple. You didn't feel like she's obviously not going to betray him like Elsa did in Last Crusade. So it was nice to have her back, and it gave since you were missing a lot of other characters who couldn't be brought back. Like Sean Connery, who didn't want to be in there, and Marcus and Sala. You couldn't bring them back, so you had to have somebody else, and it was great. I thought having her back was, even though unfortunately she brought along Mutt with her, we still had a nice story, and the story.
And they kind of changed it up.
Yeah.
Instead of being like the old serials and stuff like that, they kind of went for a 1950s B-style, B-movie feel. With the aliens and stuff like that, nuclear explosions, everybody was worried about that at that time. So they kind of brought that in there. You get the most hated, or one of the most hated scenes, the refrigerator scene.
I would argue that the monkey scene is a little more hated. I like the fridge scene a little more personally. I like it.
They're both those two scenes. When you hear about people talking about how bad Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was, it's usually always those two scenes that they mention.
And the ending, we'll get to that. But yeah. I think the fridge scene is personally right along par with what you expect to see. How is that different from a giant ball chasing after him that's been hidden in this temple for hundreds of years, and all of a sudden it's unlocked because he's walking in there, it starts chasing after him, or these rocks with magical powers. Faces melting. By this arc, how is that any different? I really don't feel that these things in there make it any different.
Yeah, it wasn't great by any means. It's not terrible. I would say that it's my least favorite. If I was to order them, I would probably say Crusade, then go Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom. They kind of fight for that second position because I do have that nostalgia. Loving Temple of Doom when I was a kid, and it's still fun to this day. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull would definitely be last.
Yeah, it does have a lot of redeeming qualities. I feel it does. It is definitely an Indiana Jones film, as a lot of people would argue it's not. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. It feels like the other movies, and I filed, even though it was fine ending with Last Crusade. I enjoyed coming along for a ride. I view each film as an individual film. I can view the franchise as a trilogy. I can view it as a quadrilogy, whatever you want to call it. But I enjoy all the films, whether they are good in some ways, bad in other ways. Every film has its merits. These films are all great. I think I can watch them time and time again and never get old with them.
Okay, so let's go back now to what we were talking about earlier. There's been now that Disney has bought Lucasfilms, which includes all the rights to Star Wars, they're actually now, they own the rights. Not the distribution rights, but they bought those. They're kind of on rent from Paramount. But there's been talk that they want to turn Indiana Jones into a James Bond type character and recast him do like 3 movies, recast him and stuff like that. I'm not opposed to the idea. I think the character, yes, he is iconic, but I think he's the type of character where you can do that. You can bring somebody else in, like they did with Roger Moore, or George Lazenby.
Yeah, we can't ignore Lazenby.
Yeah, in the James Bond series, and you can continue on Indiana Jones movies year after year after year, and Spielberg and Lucas don't have to be involved. It's one of those characters that you can keep timeless in those 1930s, 1940s eras, and keep doing new actors.
I disagree. I think when you franchise, as I'll call it, a character out, lend it out to other people to do what they will with it, to change the character as they want, you lose quality. No one would argue that Subway is as good as a shop where you can, your local shop where they buy their meat locally, they make it. Well, unless they're not meeting their health code or something. Most people would agree that the local shop is better. And I think that's what you would lose if you start changing the actor, changing the people who are working on it. You start removing Frank Marshall, Kathleen Kennedy. You remove Spielberg, you remove Lucas, you remove Harrison Ford, and I think you lose a little something. Yes, you did have they were obviously trying to do something with Mutt in the last film, and we can mention the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles where other characters and River Phoenix played him, other actors, and River Phoenix played him. But we can't. I don't feel you can replace Harrison Ford. You can't replace Spielberg. You can't replace Lucas. I think it ended with Crystal Skull if they don't want to do another one together, and that's how it should stay.
Well, Harrison Ford's too old now to do one anyway. He's already, 72, something like that.
That is true, but while he's back as Han Solo, apparently.
Yeah. Well, it's a whole different kind of thing.
That is a different aspect. I don't think it would be right to do another film.
Yeah, he's supposed to be an aging Han Solo anyway, but I don't have a problem with it as far as at least, and honestly, when it comes down to it, our opinions don't matter. Hollywood loves reimagining and redoing everything that they can get their hands on. So we're probably going to see it, maybe not soon, but Disney's not going to just sit on this property and let it rot.
Yeah, everything is ripe for redoing, rebooting. You can't really Hollywood at this point, not just Hollywood, but most film. I mean, you see remakes of American films in other countries. You see American remakes of other films. You see remaking of stories. You can. We're seeing video games made as movie. We're seeing board games. I mean, we had a Battleship movie. Let's be honest. What else? What more can we do? We're obviously going to revisit this character at some point, and I hope I won't be there to watch it.
Most likely you will, but they're not going to sit on it forever. But anyway, that's our thoughts on the Indiana Jones saga. Not trilogy, but saga, all 4 movies. So now we're going to turn it over to Mr. Joshua.
Tea time! Tea time!
Hi, welcome to Tea Time with Mr. Joshua, where I have a cup of tea and I talk about some things that maybe my brother doesn't like to discuss, or maybe is not good for a topic discussion. Over the next couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I'll be talking about Doctor Who because I'm a big fan and my brother is not. I would say that he doesn't enjoy it hardly at all.
No, I'm not really a big fan of Doctor Who. I've tried to get into it. I like the idea, but it just doesn't do it for me.
Now, I will get into how I kind of got him to enjoy at least some of it recently. We'll get into that next week. But this week, we're going to talk about the first 3 Doctors. Over the next 3 weeks, I'll be drinking since it's Doctor Who, we'll be discussing, I'll be drinking my British blend in my Doctor Who mug. It's a Piccadilly blend, it's called, from Whittard, Chelsea. If you're interested, it's quite good, a little fruity. I don't drink tea with sugar or anything, so I don't know how it would taste with that, but I imagine it would be pretty good. So we'll start off with the first Doctor. We're going to do the first 3 this week, and the first one is the one I think people are most unfamiliar with, and I think I understand why. It's a little hard to approach. The stories are from a much different era. The show started in '63, had lots of constraints, budgetary. The serial format gave it a lot of difficulties. Getting the show started, the actors. There was so many things. It was the show finding its footing. Any great show has a hard time when it first starts off, and I think you can really tell that in the early seasons of the first Doctor, especially when you have Ian and Barbara there. But it definitely picks up after you start bringing in Vicky and Steven and some of the other companions, especially by the time you get Polly and Ben in at the end. And I think the show really evolved, and you could really see by the time his run was over, how the show became the hit it was, and how people really identified with it. I mean, by the second episode, it was a big deal.
Well, I don't think you said this. What's the name of the first Doctor?
William Hartnell is the actor who plays the first Doctor.
Oh, okay.
Good point. I did miss that. But my favorite episode from him would have to obviously be the first story, An Unearthly Child, just because he really, he's such a harsh doctor. His character hadn't really been developed that much. It was the first time they had to reshoot the pilot, and I think you can really see how by the end of the last episode they had started to find an idea of what they wanted, and by the next year, the time the next year the Daleks would start, the show would become a phenomenon.
Well, the thing is when that first episode came out, it's the whole first Doctor. He's got a lot of flub lines and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to watch. And when it was originally started, it was supposed to be an educational show. So you get into the second episode with the Daleks, and that's where they brought in the BEMs, or that's what I like to call them, the big-eyed monsters.
Oh, yes, we'll talk about the big-eyed monsters, especially since it has such an important history in the show. If you've seen the movie that was part of the 50th anniversary recently, it was a TV movie on BBC Two, or they did play it here on BBC America. It had a bunch of actors portraying the origins of the show and how it started, the original actors that portrayed it, the original producers, and it was, I think, a wonderful film. And I think that it really stood out as showing how the show struggled when it was in its origins. And I mean, it's amazing that you see it. The show ends with the end of his run, and you see really how much he developed the show, even though he's most forgotten at this point. How the show was great. So if you're really interested in the first Doctor at all, or the origins of Doctor, if you just love Doctor Who and don't want to watch that slow pacing, his flubbed lines, and want to see a funny story about how he does flub his lines, you can watch An Adventure in Space and Time.
And I got to tell you, I'm not a Doctor Who fan in the least, but my favorite thing that I've ever watched from Doctor Who has to be An Adventure in Space and Time. I thought the movie was really enjoyable. Who's the actor that plays...
I believe his name is Bradley Cooper. Not Bradley Cooper. It's Bradley something Bradley.
The guy he's Fitch from
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. He does a great job, and the movie was just really enjoyable on a lot of different levels, despite me not liking Doctor Who. So if you don't like Doctor Who, I'd still go out and check it out because it is a good flick.
Yeah. Now he did have some bad episodes. Edge of Destruction was probably my least favorite from his era. It was very low budget, 2-episode serial episode, and it just didn't work. You could see the overacting. That was the third serial from the show, or the third, and you could really see how poorly how it was still struggling to come along. There was some good companions. Most people don't like Susan, but I like Susan, his granddaughter, especially since you never have had another companion like that. There was some bad companions like Dodo, who they literally just got rid of, threw her off the show for no reason, So I think the first Doctor, he's integral to the show, but he really is just the origins. You can't really see much of hardly anything of modern Doctor Who, or even the later years of Doctor Who in the first Doctor. And so that's how I feel about him.
All right, so the second Doctor, who's he?
Patrick Troughton. Patrick Troughton, probably, if not my favorite, he's very close. It's so hard to pick sometimes. I love the second Doctor's era. It's very 60s, late 60s. The companions are great. The stories are fun. It's silly. It's really, they started to try and make it a little bit more adult. They removed all the historicals, which were a big part, as you said, the educational part of the show. And this is when the show was starting to really pick up. The idea of regeneration was formed with the second Doctor. And Patrick Troughton really was the basis for all modern Doctors. That goofy, cosmic hobo, his nickname is the Cosmic Hobo. I mean, he literally really defines who the modern Doctor Who is. And I think you really see what the show was going to become in his era, even though it changed a lot, but over the next few years.
He was the one with the flute, right?
Yes, he did have a flute. Oddly enough,
every episode was like base under siege kind of thing going on.
You did see a lot of base under siege, and oddly enough, the commanders of those bases always tended to be a little kooky and somehow have some problem, even if they weren't bad. They always had slowed the progress of solving the problems. But I think his era, even though it does have its issues, such as you've stated, is so fun, and the companion is Jamie, who is hands down my favorite Doctor Who companion of all time, who has the greatest rapport with the Doctor. He is so fun. It's the best buddy companion. I mean, no male companion has ever worked as well as Jamie. Fraser Hines really defines like that character. I'm a huge fan. I cannot praise how much he's been in more episodes than any other Doctor Who companion. I mean, he's just amazing.
So that being said, what's your favorite episode and what's your least favorite episode?
I would say Invasion for sure. Invasion it's so iconic. It's an ape serial story with the Cybermen invading the world, invading the planet. They've been building up to this over the years, starting with the 10th planet, where the first episode of the appearance of the Cybermen, where the first Doctor regenerates. Then you see him again in the moon base. You saw him again in the Wheel in space. And finally, they reach their goal of getting to Earth and invading Earth, and it's so fun. You can watch it on DVD, even though it is missing 2 episodes. They are animated. It's just amazing. Oddly enough, my least favorite Second Doctor story that I've seen, I've listened to a lot of them, but I'm only going to count the ones I've seen, is going to be the Moon Base, which is another Cyberman story, basically because it's badly done. Polly and Ben are not the greatest in companions. They're some of my least favorite companions, but the episode just doesn't really stand out. It's kind of a repeat of the 10th planet, and it's not very fun. Oddly enough, they came back and had the best episode later, though. So.
And then we get to Mr. Judo Chop.
Oh,
we get to
yeah.
John Pertwee.
John Pertwee, that's my boy right there. That's my other Doctor who balances back and forth between being my favorite. I'm really a big fan of his style. It's so different. It's in stark contrast to the kind of psychedelic, a little bit 60s that you had in the Second Doctor's era, especially towards the end. And it's finally in color. And for once, the Doctor is a hands-on kind of guy. He's judo chopping people, as you said, which is one of my favorite aspects. Peter Capaldi recently did that, and I have to say it was I laughed so hard because it made me feel so good that he just literally judo chopped someone in the episode. Like it was amazing. I loved it so much. It made me finally feel something for his Doctor, which we'll discuss that at some later point.
Well, and one of the interesting things about John Pertwee, the third Doctor, is that he was actually set to play along with, if they couldn't get Sean Connery in the Indiana Jones movies, they were going to pick either Gregory Peck or John Pertwee to play his dad.
Those are some pretty good actors right there. You can't argue with that. I mean, his iconic. He had another show, Wurzel Grummel or something. I can't really pronounce it. It was a famous kids show based off a book. He did a lot of great things, and as the Doctor, his era was unlike anyone else's. He was had these flamboyant outfits that really stood out, velvet coats and things like that. I mean, this is where you did start to see you had gotten rid of the screaming companion, but now you continued to have the original, the really dumb companion still, with Jo, who I'm not particularly a fan of. She was probably my least favorite companion of the third Doctor. Not, Sarah Jane was great. Obviously, she's legendary. She came in the end. My favorite, oddly, is Liz Shaw, who was, in Prometheus we saw, we had a character named after. And I think that his era had some really good social commentary. The show started to grow up a little bit. I mean, Doctor Who and the Silurians, which is probably my favorite one. It's the only episode that has Doctor Who in the title of the episode. Is probably my favorite episode. It's an 8-parter with some interesting music that everybody always laughs at. And I think it really has a lot to say, though, about human beings and how we are, and the Doctor, and who the Doctor is, and what he was becoming. And then I think there's some stinkers, obviously. I mean, Death to the Daleks was probably my least favorite. It had some really bad effects. There's literally a cliffhanger where he's stops and is afraid of a couple of different colored tiles on the ground. I mean, it was obviously the end of his era. He wasn't really feeling it anymore. But those are the first 3 Doctors. I love them. I think they're great. I mean, you've seen a few episodes, I think, from any of them. Out of those 3, do you enjoy any of them at all?
Out of those 3, I'd probably have to say Pertwee. Just his crazy outfits. He's always in some kind of crazy car. He's just the judo chopping. I mean, he's like the James Bond of Doctor Who.
And he even kind of has that talking down to people too. I agree. Like I said, I go back and forth between him. Right now, I would probably say I'm in a Pertwee mood as my favorite Doctor, just because he's got that attitude where he doesn't take nothing from nobody, and we're starting to see that again in the 12th Doctor. So there's my tea time this week. Hopefully you'll join me next week on a final thought, my movie of the week, this week is going to be the best years of our lives. It was the Best Picture winner of 1946, so look it up. If it sounds interesting, you should check it out. It's amazing. Have a good one.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Hi, and welcome to the first incarnation of Schreck Swamp. This is Schreck Swamp, and it's basically where I can play around with anything I want because guess what? It's my swamp. So with the new football season upon us, I'm going to tell you who the greatest quarterback is of all time. Now, you see a lot of top 10 lists and stuff like that, best QBs, that kind of stuff. He's always in the list, but he's never number one, and he should be. And I'm here to tell you why. That man's name is Dan Marino.
Yeah, he's a Dolphin, and let's face it, they had the coolest logo in the entire NFL. I believe they just changed it. It was the coolest logo in the NFL. So I got to agree. You know, I mostly got to agree with you on that one.
Okay, so far, the one thing you always hear about why he's not the greatest quarterback of all time is because he never won a championship. And I'm here to tell you that's complete baloney. Alrighty? To say that one individual should be judged by the merits of an entire team is just asinine and stupid. Okay? By that logic, Trent Dilfer and Jim McMahon are better quarterbacks than Dan Marino, which everybody knows is just ridiculous. That also means that Joe Montana and Terry Bradshaw are both the greatest quarterbacks of all time. They both won 4. But nobody is going to tell you that Terry Bradshaw is the greatest quarterback of all time. Also, that means that Eli Manning, with his 2 Super Bowl rings, is better than Peyton. You can't go that way. So I guess these old sports writers and old football players who actually have rings, these commentators, came up with this idiotic idea that you have to win a championship as a quarterback to be a great quarterback. You can't judge the quarterback by an entire team. It just doesn't work that way.
Now, while I can agree with what you're saying, I believe there is some merit in the mindset that you have to have a championship. Right? I mean, the fact that he has none stands out in who he is as a quarterback. I mean, he obviously had. Are you going to say he had no weapons for his entire career over there in Miami? I mean, he could. And one, if it was so bad over there, why didn't he go to another team? He could have been great, but you can't just. You have to at least consider the fact that. I mean, the man played for how many years did the man play for?
He played for 17.
17 years, and the man never won a championship. You mentioned all these lesser quarterbacks. Yes, it is a team effort of a game, and he needs to be able to elevate his team. How much did Manning elevate his team above the fact that their inadequacies to make them get that championship? How many quarterbacks and how many have been able to do that to their team? And I don't think you can ignore that fact.
No, you can't ignore the fact, but there's other reasons why. So I told you why you can't judge a quarterback by the greatness, the Super Bowl greatness, because it's a team effort. But if you look at his individual records, Dan Marino has records for the most games over 400 yards. He has the record for the quickest time or the fewest amount of games it took him to get to 100 TDs, 200 TDs, and he's tied with Peyton Manning for the fewest games to get to 300 TDs.
What was that record that was just beat by him by Breeze a couple of years ago?
Yeah, in 2011, it took. Now, grant you, this had Dan Marino set the record in 1984. First guy over 5,000 passing yards. That record stood until 2011 when Drew Brees broke it, and then guess what? Peyton Manning broke it last year by 1 yard. But still, you have 5,000-yard season. That season was not bested until 2 rule changes. 2 rule changes in the mid-90s and the mid-2000s, which increased the production of the quarterback by lessening or increasing the amount of pass interference calls, making it easier for the receivers to catch the ball.
What were these official rule changes? Like, what were the rule changes that happened? Like, what did they implement? Do you happen to know?
They just became more stringent on the pass interference rule, making defenders have to stay back off of the wide receivers a lot more. And if you look, since 2004, those numbers, all the quarterback numbers have jumped. In fact, between 1984 when Dan Marino set his 5,084 yard record until 2008, not one single person broke 5,000 yards. So that tells you he was playing the majority of his career was spent playing in an NFL where defensive backs could jump all over the wide receivers, and he still was able to compile over 5,000 yards, a feat which wasn't even accomplished again until 2008.
Yeah, but I mean, how come he never got that championship? Why can we say, why did he never get that championship? If he was such a great quarterback, how come he couldn't elevate his team to that level of winning, as Charlie Sheen would say, where they could take it down I mean, did they even make it to the Super Bowl at any point?
They did make it to the Super Bowl in 1984, and they lost to the 49ers. I believe the score was 38-16. Now, with that being the way that was, now
what was that? 38-16.
38-16.
That's a pretty rough game.
Yeah, the difference is that the 49ers had a great wide receivers, a good running game, and a defense that just shut him down. You can't really compete with that. Now, if you look though at his career when he was in there, and any analyst will tell you that Dan Marino is the best pure passer in the game of all time. I mean, right there, why can't he be elevated to the number one quarterback? What, because he didn't win a Super Bowl? Best pure passer in the game it means a lot.
Well, how was he on the move? What was his interception? How was his interception rating?
Well, he wasn't a very mobile quarterback, but several times, and he has the highest percentage of the lowest percentage of sacks in his career of any quarterback over I don't know how many snaps. I don't know that number, but yeah, I mean, he was never get sacked. He was always he wasn't a runner, but he was very mobile in the pocket. Never got sacked. Now the reason why he didn't win the Super Bowl, he had no defense. If you look at the records of this defense, the average defense when he was on that team, they were ranked around about 15. Okay, and he
that's middle of the park.
It's middle of the park. Now, back then, there was only 28 teams, so his team was routinely past the middle.
That is a little below 50%. I grant you that.
Okay. Also, he had not one single Hall of Fame wide receiver, not one single Hall of Fame running back. He had no running game to speak of whatsoever. One time in his 17-year career did the Dolphins have a running back that garnered over 1,000 yards in a season. Only once. All that pressure was put on Dan Marino. And you know what? When you compile 5,000 yards, go 14-2 and make it to the Super Bowl, that's pretty great. Now, those same analysts that tell you that you have to win a championship to be the greatest quarterback of all time. Well, think about this. These are the same analysts that when the playoffs start, they say you got to have a solid running game. You got to have a solid running game. Well, we've already pointed out that Dan Marino never had a solid running game. These are also the same analysts who say defense wins championships. Well, if they don't have a defense, how are they going to win a championship? You can look at Peyton Manning last year, the Denver Broncos in 2013, the great offense, the record-setting offense they had, and guess what? The defense destroyed them in the championship, in the Super Bowl. Now you look at going a few years back to that magical 18-1 season that the Patriots had. 2007. The reason they lost the Super Bowl is because they were all offense, no defense, and the Giants shut them down.
Well, I recall their defense actually not being that bad that year. I remember their defense. That was like the end of their because they did have a strong defense, but it was starting to get a little old at that point, if I recall.
Yeah, they were old, but they were not the defense that won those first 3 Super Bowls.
Do you happen to remember their rating? Like, was it mid? I would assume it'd be like 8, 10, something like in the middle there.
Yeah, well, regardless. Defense wins championships. You have to have a running game going into the playoffs. Okay? Dan Marino had none of those things. He had his arm, and he still made it to the playoffs year after year after year. He only made it to 1 Super Bowl and did lose. But if you look at the records that he set, the only time his records got broken were by Brett Favre and Peyton Manning in an era that was dominated by teams just throwing the ball up and down the field with these no pass interference rules. I mean, you look at the numbers and compare it to the era that he played in and the era that these other quarterbacks, Brett Favre played the majority of his career in, Peyton Manning played the majority, Tom Brady, the era that these guys played the majority of their time in was an era dominated by easy passing.
Yeah. Okay, I have one last question that for me will decide how much I feel about him as a quarterback. I may have missed it if you said it, I apologize. What is his win percentage, his overall win percentage?
I don't know his overall winning percentage, but I do know it's over 500. He was a winning quarterback. He's not as winning as, Terry Bradshaw or Joe Montana. He doesn't have that high of a winning percentage, Tom Brady, but his winning percentage is up there. Now, once again, winning percentage is based on a team effort.
Now, actually, if you think again, that might actually be an important thing. If his winning percentage wasn't that great, and he still put up those numbers and those stats, that is pretty impressive. Come to think of it, now that I give it a little more thought, that is pretty impressive.
And, well, the one thing that you always talk about is a quarterback is more. Well, I already told you he's a pure passer. But he was also a great leader on the field. He was a mobile without being a running quarterback. He always continually elevated his team. And if you look at, he's got the most fourth quarter comebacks. And if you look at that just right there, and I'm not sure, there's a certain kind of thing. He either lost it or he still has it. But most fourth quarter comebacks. I mean, in fact, the last game he played was a fourth quarter comeback against Peyton Manning in his last game in 1999. So that being said, I mean, the guy has it all over. He's got the stats. He played in an era that where he was the most dominant quarterback consistently every single year. And just because he didn't win a championship, he's often dismissed. And I'm here to tell you that that's a bunch of bupkis because he was still the best quarterback regardless of that championship. It's a team effort.
And the laces were out.
It's the final countdown.
And welcome to the final countdown. Today we're going to be, we're big sci-fi fans, so today we're going to be going down under top 5 robots. Very broad category. You can kind of go any way with this one. Mr. Joshua does have a few honorable mentions for us.
Yeah, I want to just give a shout out to Inspector Gadget, to Robot Bill and Ted, and to You're in a Johnny Cab for my honorable mentions there.
Alrighty, so now we're going to be counting down. I'll start with 5, you go 5. We'll count down to 1. So my number 5 is going to be Bishop, played by Lance Henriksen from the movie Aliens. He's just a well-constructed character, and you can't ever go wrong putting Lance Henriksen in any role whatsoever. Your top 5? Or your number 5?
My number 5 would be Wall-E from the movie Wall-E. Obviously, I would assume you know who I'm talking about. The only character I would ever use the C word to describe.
Yeah, and by C word, you do mean cute. Just for everybody out there who's thinking something differently. My number 4 is going to be the T-800 from the first 2 Terminator movies, played by my man crush, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The T-800 is just an awesome killing machine, and anything you put Arnold in, he's just priceless. So your number 4?
My number 4 is going to be from my favorite Mel Brooks movie and one of probably my favorite comedy of all time, Dot Matrix. I think she's hilarious.
More oil.
With Joan Rivers just dying, I think it's kind of poignant that we're doing this, and that has nothing to do with why I chose it. It's just I love the movie so much I had to pick her.
Yeah, I think you had your list planned even before she passed away.
Yeah, that is correct.
So my number 3 is going to be our Giscard from Rentalov from the Robot Stories, written by Isaac Asimov.
What's the R stand for?
Robot. He's obviously, Asimov's most famous for his robot stories, and the best robot I thought he ever constructed in any of his stories is going to be our Giscard from the Robots of Dawn, and from Robots in Empire. Your number 3?
My number 3 is kind of a cheat. I'm going to go with all of the robots from Futurama. There's so many great ones. I couldn't just pick one. You have Bender. You have the hedonism bot with all of his eating his grapes and stuff, and you have Rodney. There's just so many wonderful characters that in that show. I couldn't just pick one.
And so you already named my number 2. My number 2 would be Wall-E. He's just a cute and lovable character, and even though he hardly talks throughout the entire movie, he only says a few words. Just the way he interacts and everything like that, he just leaves such a high emotional impact on everybody.
My number 2 would be Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, which obviously was the inspiration for our logo, the Nerd Generation. We couldn't help pick Data. I couldn't help but love Data. He's such a great fleshed out character. He really developed over the stories you got to see, and then when he passed away, it was just an unfortunate thing. It was a life-shattering moment for me.
Yeah, and that's actually my number 1. I think it's self-evident that Data would be my number 1. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I think Data is a very amazing character played by Brent Spiner. And actually, I used to get crap when I was in the Air Force because I actually welled up with tears when we saw the premiere of Nemesis because, at the end, spoiler alert, he dies. So that's going to be my number 1, though.
Yeah, my number one, you already named, actually, I believe it was your number 3, was Giscard. Robot Giscard. Isaac Asimov created the word robotics. It never even existed before him. So my number one has to be his character. I love the robot stories. I mean, you introduced me to him, and I fell in love with him, and I think I even like him more than you a little bit. So that would be my number one.
Alrighty, so there's our top 5 robots. And that ends our first inaugural episode of Schreck Talk. I hope you enjoyed us. I hope you enjoyed it. Please join us next week where we have the ultimate throwdown of 90s sitcoms, Friends versus Seinfeld. We continue on with Doctor Who, and I tell you why Superman is better than Batman. See you later.
Go away or I shall taunt you a second time.